Immediate family only, the gilded invitation read, addressed to my parents' house where I hadn't lived in 15 years. My brother Daniel's handwritten note at the bottom twisted the knife deeper, you wouldn't understand the business stuff anyway. Enjoy your little consulting job. But as I watched their champagne-soaked IPO celebration livestream from my corner office on the 43rd floor, my assistant Maria knocked urgently on the glass door with a look of barely contained excitement. Ms. Whitfield? The Morrison Industries board is on line 1. They're asking why Aurora Capital is requesting an emergency shareholder vote, and they sound terrified. I allowed myself exactly 3 seconds to smile before picking up the phone. This is Samantha Whitfield, Managing Director of Aurora Capital. How can I help you? The voice on the other end belonged to Gerald Patterson, Morrison Industries' chief legal counsel and my father's college roommate. I'd known him my entire life. He'd bounced me on his knee at Christmas parties, called me Little Sammy, and once told my father that it was such a shame I hadn't been born a boy who could actually contribute to the family business. Ms. Whitfield, we've received notice that Aurora Capital holds a majority position in Morrison Industries and is requesting an emergency board meeting. There must be some mistake. Our IPO documentation shows no single entity holding more than 15%. There's no mistake, Gerald. Aurora Capital, through its subsidiary holdings including Blackwood Ventures, Sterling Equity Partners, and Meridian Trust, collectively controls 51.3% of Morrison Industries' outstanding shares. The documentation was filed correctly with the SEC. Perhaps your team should have read it more carefully before today's celebration. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. That's impossible. We would have known. You would have known if you'd looked. But you were so focused on celebrating that you didn't notice who was actually at the table. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. I expect full attendance. And Gerald? You might want to tell my father to save some of that champagne. He's going to need it. I hung up and turned back to the live stream on my laptop. My father was mid-speech, talking about building Morrison Industries from the ground up and the importance of family legacy. My mother stood beside him in her designer gown, beaming. Daniel and his wife flanked them, looking every bit the golden heirs apparent. Not a single one of them had thought to invite me. I closed the laptop and looked out at the Manhattan skyline. 15 years. It had taken me 15 years to get to this moment. And now that it was here, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just a bone-deep exhaustion, and the faint hope that after Monday, I might finally be free. The Morrison family had been in manufacturing for 4 generations. My great-grandfather started with a single factory in Ohio, making parts for the automobile industry. My grandfather expanded into aerospace. My father transformed it into a diversified industrial conglomerate worth, as of today's IPO, approximately $2.8 billion. And through all of it, there had been one consistent truth: Morrison Industries was for Morrison men. I was born the middle child, sandwiched between Daniel, the golden firstborn son, and my younger sister Courtney, the baby who could do no wrong. From the earliest age, the expectations were clear. Daniel would inherit the business. Courtney would marry well. And I would, well, no one really knew what I would do. I was the afterthought, the quiet one, the girl who spent too much time reading and asking questions that made the adults uncomfortable. When I was 12, I asked my father why women couldn't run companies. He'd laughed and patted my head. Sweetie, it's not that women can't. It's that they don't want to. They're better suited for other things. Supporting roles. You'll understand when you're older. I understood perfectly. I just didn't accept it. I graduated top of my class from Wharton, beating Daniel's mediocre performance by a mile. I earned my MBA from Harvard while working full-time at an investment bank. I made my first million before I turned 30, all while my family treated my career as a cute hobby that would surely end when I found the right man. The turning point came at my father's 60th birthday party. I was 32, recently promoted to vice president at my firm, managing a portfolio worth $500 million. I'd flown home specifically for the occasion, hoping that maybe, finally, my accomplishments would be acknowledged. Instead, I watched my father announce that Daniel would be taking over as CEO of Morrison Industries. Daniel, who had coasted through a state school on legacy connections. Daniel, who had worked at exactly one company his entire life, the family business, in positions created specifically for him. Daniel, who couldn't read a balance sheet without someone explaining it to him 3 times. My son, my father said, his arm around Daniel's shoulders, represents the future of this company. The 5th generation of Morrison leadership. I couldn't be prouder. No one looked at me. No one mentioned that I'd built a career from nothing while Daniel had everything handed to him. I was invisible, as always. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. I would never ask for their respect again. I would take it. The acquisition took 3 years to execute. I left my firm and started Aurora Capital with my own money and investments from colleagues who believed in my vision. We focused on manufacturing and industrial companies, not coincidentally, Morrison Industries sector. I learned everything about my family's business, their suppliers, their customers, their weaknesses. And there were many weaknesses. Daniel's leadership was, predictably, a disaster. He made flashy acquisitions that didn't integrate well. He ignored market trends. He alienated long-time customers with his arrogance. Morrison Industries was still profitable. My grandfather had built too strong a foundation for Daniel to destroy completely, but it was underperforming its potential by at least 40%. The board, dominated by my father's friends and yes-men, did nothing. They rubber-stamped Daniel's decisions and collected their fees. The company drifted while its competitors innovated. I started buying shares through subsidiary companies, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements individually. Sterling Equity picked up 8%. Blackwood Ventures acquired 12% through a series of quiet transactions. Meridian Trust added another 15%. Each company had different registered agents, different addresses, different public faces. All controlled by Aurora Capital. All controlled by me. When Morrison Industries announced their IPO, planning to take the company public to fund Daniel's latest vanity project, a ridiculous expansion into electric vehicles that made no strategic sense, I saw my opportunity. The IPO would dilute existing shareholders, but it would also create a window for larger acquisitions. I worked with my team around the clock, filing the necessary paperwork, coordinating purchases across multiple entities, ensuring everything was legal but obscured. By the time the IPO launched, I controlled 51.3% of Morrison Industries. My family had no idea. They'd been so focused on the celebration, the media coverage, the champagne and congratulations, that they'd never thought to check who was actually buying their shares. They'd dismissed me as irrelevant. And that dismissal had been my greatest advantage. The board meeting on Monday was held in Morrison Industries headquarters in Columbus, Ohio. I hadn't been back to Ohio in over a decade. The building had changed. Daniel had commissioned a gaudy renovation that screamed new money, but the conference room where my father had held court for 30 years looked exactly the same. I arrived early, before anyone else. I wanted to sit in my father's chair, just for a moment, just to feel what it was like. The leather was worn and soft. The view overlooked the factory floor, 3 stories below, where workers assembled components just as they had in my great-grandfather's day. This was the family legacy, the thing I'd been told I could never be part of. I placed my briefcase on the table and waited. Gerald Patterson arrived first, followed by the other board members. They looked at me with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. Finally, my father entered, flanked by Daniel and my mother. Dad stopped cold when he saw me in his chair. "Samantha? What are you doing here? This is a board meeting, not a family reunion." "I'm aware, Dad. I requested this meeting." Daniel laughed, that condescending chuckle he'd perfected over years of never being challenged. "Sammy, this is cute, but you ain't just walk into a board meeting because you feel left out of the IPO party. This is serious business. Why don't you wait outside, and we can get lunch after?" "Sit down, Daniel." Something in my voice made him stop. Maybe it was the complete absence of the deference he'd always expected from me. Maybe it was the way the board members were looking at me, with fear instead of dismissal. He sat. I opened my briefcase and distributed folders to each person at the table. Inside, you'll find documentation confirming that Aurora Capital and its subsidiary holdings now control 51.3% of Morrison Industries' outstanding shares. As majority shareholder, I have the legal authority to call this emergency meeting and to propose changes to the company's leadership and strategic direction. My father grabbed the folder, flipping through the pages with increasingly frantic movements. "This is fraud. This has to be fraud. There's no way. Every acquisition was filed correctly with the SEC, Dad. Your legal team had access to this information. They simply didn't think to look because they assumed no one would challenge your control." I paused. "Certainly not your disappointing daughter." The room was silent except for the rustle of papers as board members reviewed the documentation. Gerald Patterson had gone pale. Daniel's wife, who had somehow inserted herself into the meeting, looked like she might faint. "This took me 3 years," I continued. 3 years of building relationships, analyzing financials, and watching Daniel run this company into mediocrity. Morrison Industries should be worth twice its current valuation. Under competent leadership, it will be. Daniel finally found his voice. "You can't do this. This is our company. Our family built this, our great-grandfather built this," I corrected. "Our grandfather expanded it. Dad maintained it. And you've been slowly destroying it with vanity projects and strategic incompetence. The electric vehicle expansion? It would have bankrupted the company within 5 years. Your acquisition of Hendrix Manufacturing? You overpaid by $80 million. The factory closures in Michigan? You eliminated your most efficient production facilities to fund a new corporate campus that serves no operational purpose. I turned to the board members. I have a detailed strategic plan for Morrison Industries' future. We will divest from non-core assets, reinvest in research and development, and refocus on our manufacturing strengths. I'm proposing that Daniel Morrison be removed as CEO immediately and that I be installed as interim leadership until a permanent replacement can be found. My father stood up, his face purple with rage. I will not allow this. I built this company, you built nothing, Dad. You inherited everything and had the good fortune not to destroy it. That's not the same thing. I met his eyes without flinching. You had 4 decades to choose competence over nepotism. You chose Daniel every single time, even when everyone could see he wasn't capable. You chose him over me, not because he was better, but because he was a man. Now you're going to live with the consequences of that choice. My mother spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. Samantha, honey, why are you doing this? We're your family. Families support each other. I looked at her, at the woman who had stood by silently while I was dismissed and overlooked my entire life. When did this family ever support me, Mom? When I graduated top of my class and Dad didn't attend because Daniel had a tennis match. When I made vice president and you forgot to call. When I flew home for Thanksgiving and spent the entire dinner listening to everyone praise Daniel's vision, while no one asked about my work. I pulled out one more document. 2 years ago, I tried to come home. I wanted to bury the hatchet, to offer my expertise to help the company. I sent Dad a proposal for restructuring the manufacturing division that would have saved $15 million annually. Do you know what he did with it? My father's face went pale. He had his secretary send me a form letter thanking me for my interest and suggesting I apply through the company website if I ever wanted to pursue employment opportunities. He didn't even read it. He didn't even recognize his own daughter's name. I slid the form letter across the table. My mother picked it up, her hands shaking. You made it very clear where I stood in this family. I'm simply responding accordingly. The vote was procedural. With 51.3% control, I didn't need anyone else's support. Daniel was removed as CEO. My father was stripped of his chairman emeritus position. I appointed an interim leadership team from within the company, people who had been sidelined for years because they dared to question Daniel's decisions. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, my family looked like they'd aged a decade. Daniel kept threatening lawsuits that his lawyers quietly told him had no merit. My mother cried. My father sat in stunned silence, unable to process how completely his world had inverted. As people began to leave, my father grabbed my arm. Samantha. Wait. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. Why? His voice cracked. I know I wasn't. I know things weren't perfect. But we're family. Blood. That has to mean something. Why would you destroy everything I built? I'm not destroying it, Dad. I'm saving it. Daniel would have run it into the ground within 10 years. The IPO was a desperate cash grab to fund his failing strategies. I'm giving Morrison Industries a future. But why like this? Why not just talk to me? I stared at him for a long moment. I tried. For 34 years, I tried. I tried to earn your respect. I tried to prove my value. I tried to show you that I could contribute. And every single time, you chose Daniel. Not because he was better, but because the idea of your daughter being more capable than your son was something you could and accept. I removed his hand from my arm, gently but firmly. I didn't do this to hurt you, Dad. I did it because you left me no other choice. You built a wall between me and this company, and the only way through was to buy the whole thing. I walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. 6 months later, Morrison Industries' stock price had increased 34%. The electric vehicle division was sold to a competitor who actually had the infrastructure to develop it. The Michigan factories were reopened, creating 800 jobs. Industry analysts called it one of the most successful corporate turnarounds in recent memory. I didn't take the CEO position permanently. Instead, I hired a world-class executive to run day-to-day operations while I maintained strategic oversight through the board. Aurora Capital had other investments to manage, and despite everything, I didn't want my entire identity consumed by my family's company. Daniel took a position at a consulting firm, the kind that hires names rather than talent. He still tells people at parties that his sister stole the family business, conveniently omitting the part where he was running it into bankruptcy. My father retired, officially. He spends most of his time at the country club now, avoiding questions about how he lost control of his own company. We don't speak. I send birthday cards that go unanswered. My mother reached out once, about 3 months after the board meeting. She wanted to have lunch, to clear the air. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. We met at a restaurant in Manhattan, neutral territory. She looked older than I remembered, fragile in a way she hadn't been before. I didn't know, she said, halfway through her salad. About your proposal. About the form letter. I didn't know he'd done that. Would it have mattered if you did? She didn't answer. We both knew the truth. I used to wonder, I said, if things would have been different if I'd been born first. If Daniel had been the middle child. Would you have seen me then? Or was it always about gender, never about birth order? My mother set down her fork. Your father came from a traditional family. His father, his grandfather, they had certain expectations. I tried to soften it when you were young, but not hard enough. She flinched. No. Not hard enough. I'm sorry, Samantha. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry. I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had loved me in whatever limited way she was capable of, and felt something loosen in my chest. Thank you for saying that. We finished lunch without much more conversation. She hugged me before leaving, and I let her. Some wounds can't be healed, but they can stop bleeding. Last week, I received an invitation to Daniel's daughter's christening. Handwritten, addressed to me personally, with a note from my sister-in-law apologizing for past misunderstandings. I sent a gift, a generous contribution to a college fund, but declined to attend. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be. But I keep the invitation on my desk, next to the IPO announcement I'd been excluded from. A reminder of where I started and where I ended up. They'd told me I wouldn't understand the business stuff. They'd told me the company was for Morrison men. They'd told me, in 1,000 small ways, that I didn't belong. Now Aurora Capital's nameplate hangs in the Morrison Industries boardroom. My signature approves every major decision. And somewhere, my great-grandfather, the one who built something from nothing, who knew what it meant to be underestimated, is smiling. The family legacy continues. Just not the way they expected. They say living well is the best revenge, but they're wrong. The best revenge is succeeding so completely that your success becomes undeniable, even to those who spent their whole lives denying you. It's not about making them suffer. It's about making them see. And once they see, they can never unsee. That's the part that stays with them forever.